G'day guys, this is Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and I'm here for another expert strategy session. I've got Bobby Haeri from the Investors Agency. Now, we've been working really closely with Bobby and his team in regards to their property buying services with many clients who've been looking to get a foot on the property ladder, maybe a time poor and don't have the time to be able to research and do the due diligence when it comes to buying property. Obviously we wanted to get Bobby on to have a bit of a conversation to get a bit of a feel for what's been happening in the property market over the last 12 months, what's happened with this whole coronavirus crisis, and hopefully give you guys a bit of insight around what the property market should look like moving forwards and how you can continue to make the right decisions when it comes to property in your portfolio. So, Bobby, thanks for joining us, mate. How you doing?
Good, Jackson. Yourself?
Yeah, doing well, mate. Doing well. So Bobby, tell us. Yeah, good to have you, mate. So, give us a bit of background. What's your business and what do you do?
So the Investors Agency, it's a buyer's agency focused on investors Australia-wide. We help investors, where we help investors find their properties is based on what their income is and based on their situation. So anything from $250,000 property outside of Brisbane to your multi-million-dollar blue ring properties inside the CBDs. Simple as that.
Fantastic, mate. Beautiful. So talk to us about what's been happening in the property market over the last 12 months.
So last year, towards the end of last year, we saw some crazy growth that I don't think many people were expecting. It caught me off guard, admittedly, especially in Sydney, where we're based in the Northern Beaches. We're seeing the same sort of growth that we saw 2016, 2017, which is crazy. And over the past 40 years, we've never seen that before, where property prices have your big boom, and then it sort of plateaued for a little bit, and then we had the same amount of growth again, which was unforeseen. So it was really, really interesting the way things were heading. And then, pretty much, obviously, as we all know, the coronavirus came, and believe it or not, only until last weekend we hadn't seen any effects on the property market. The weekend that just finished, we saw some auction clearance rates drop down to 30%, but that's also because we weren't allowed to have auctions. Sorry, we weren't allowed to have auctions anymore as well. So obviously, a lot of we couldn't do it in that regards. I think about 20% got sold, not on auction, but the others just all got passed in. So last weekend was really the first time we've seen some effect on the housing market.
So what was the clearance rates before that, Bobby? Approximately.
They were up in the 80, at least on the Northern Beaches, in the 80%.
Yeah, wow. So it dropped from about 80% down to about 57% once you add in the 20% that was sold off market.
Exactly, that's right.
Wow. Okay, so it's still quite a big hit. So prior to that, mate, I guess what were the kind of the kind of conversation on the ground? Because obviously I've seen a lot of your stuff on social media where you were going to open home inspections and there was like 30, 40, 50 sets of couples that were going to property. So that's a good indicator, right?
100%. There's not enough stock. Simple as that. In the high demand areas in Sydney, there's just not enough stock on the market, and money was cheap, so people had the money to spend. So we were seeing 30, 40 people at every open home, like lines out the door that I haven't experienced even back in 2016, 2017. I didn't experience stuff like that.
And it's really crazy, mate, because I think we saw that people, particularly your kind of first home buyers or your first property buyers, were really frustrated as a result of the last boom. It was hard to get money, and because the banks were really tight, there was properties that were going beyond their budgets, and then we saw this kind of downturn in the market, and then we've started to see this upswing where it was driven a lot by the younger demographic, right?
100%, that's right. I think a lot of first-home buyers came into the market. What I did notice as well, there was a lot of first-home buyers, but they were there with their parents. Sure. So it was the bank of mum and dad. That, obviously, the mum and dad's properties had gone up from $1 million to $2 million, and they just had, or they didn't have any loans on their house, and they just had money to spend. So we're noticing a lot of that as well.
So, but what do you think was the main reason for the shortage of stock? Why do you think as many people were putting their properties on the market? Was it because they thought the property market was going to go through another big swing and they wanted to hold on? What do you think?
So why do I think not many people put their properties on the market?
Yeah.
I think just because prior to that, there was a bit of a downturn and everyone was sort of expecting, we've had 10 years of growth. So when APRA tightened the lending and the banks pulled the handbrakes on, and the property market slowed down, I think everyone was expecting it was going to be another, 4 or 5 years of minimal growth.
Sure. So they were just kind of battening down the hatches and waiting.
Exactly, that's right. But then we did start seeing just listings over the past 2 months. Because when someone wants to put a property on the market, it can't happen immediately. It's going to take 1 or 2 months for everything, or all the wheels to go into motion. Past 1 or 2 months, we noticed a lot more listings. But then now it's a matter of finding a balance, right? Where are the buyers?
So, mate, obviously right now, as we know, there's no open homes that are allowed, no auctions because people can't because of the social distancing. Clearance rates are obviously dropping as a result of this. You've obviously had a lot of close conversations with real estate agents. So what are they doing to pivot? And what's the feedback on the floor in regards to both buyers and sellers with what we're going through at the moment?
So a lot of the good agents were preparing for this about a month ago. So they've done virtual tours. A lot of the agents have organised. We do all our inspections as private inspections anyway, so this doesn't affect us in any way. We very rarely, unless we really have to, we are very rarely out on Saturdays and doing the inspections. We're always doing the private viewings anyway. So in that regards, it doesn't really affect us. It's just, I guess now we've got to work with the agents a bit more because they're arranging private viewings for everyone else. So in that regards, it hasn't really affected us. Virtual tours, like I said, they're working on the virtual tours. Everyone's sort of preparing to start doing things that way, which I think for investors is fine. Like none of our clients have actually seen any of the properties we purchased for them.
Sure.
As long as we're doing all the due diligence, we show them the numbers, we show them everything stacks up. It's not a concern for our investor clients.
Okay. And in terms of the conversations that you're having with both investors and potentially hearing from what the agents are saying from a buyer's standpoint, what's the feeling out there in regards to the property market with the coronavirus?
So we've seen a few different groups. So I think about 60% of the people we've spoken to are wanting to sit on their hands and wait to see what happens. They haven't been through something like this before. They're not as experienced and they're, I guess, a little bit concerned. But we've also seen two other groups of people. So another group of people we've seen that actually they've come out now. So, Warren Buffett always says, be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. The people that were getting in touch with us 1 year ago, 2 years ago, were normally your mum and dad investors. Whereas now they've all taken the back seat, and now the people who are getting in touch are all your experienced investors. So people that have their cash flows in place, people that have their buffers in place, and people that know, unfortunately, some people are going to be over leveraged, some people are going to be hurting, and they've sort of prepared because, like every 10, 15 years, we do have a downturn on average, and we hadn't had one. I think Australia hadn't been, we sort of missed 2008. So we hadn't been in one, a deep recession for nearly 20 years. So yeah, it's like now the inquiries that we're getting are more from your experienced investors. They've got their buffers, but your mum and dad investors have taken the back seat for sure.
I get you, and I guess it's those individuals who have the kind of the mindset to know that even if the market does fall beyond this point, they're going to be waiting for the long term. They can play the long game.
100%, exactly. That's right. And I had to reassure a lot of our clients as well about that because they were, we were going through the negotiation process, or we were about to go unconditional on a few situations, and this just started really escalating. And I had to reassure them. I said, look, we're not buying this property for what's happening in the next 1, 2, or 3 months. You're buying this property for 10, 20, 30 years time. And another thing you've got to be mindful of is if you're going to wait for 6 months to see what happens, how do you know that you're going to be able to borrow money then?
Yeah, I get you. Because look, the banks are already tightening things in terms of certain industries that they're blacklisting because there's just too much risk. So, Bobby, do you see that this is a buyer's market or a seller's market right now?
I think we've definitely gone back into a buyer's market.
And I guess that means that as a buyer, there's more opportunity to negotiate.
100%, that's right. I think anyone that's going to be putting their property on the market now is going to be doing it because they don't really have much of a choice. To be completely honest, there's a lot of stock on the market now that they had planned from 6 months ago or from 3 or 4 months ago. But anything that comes onto the market now, it's a safe bet to say that they're putting it on there because they don't have a choice, whether they've over leveraged themselves or whether they need to sell to pay other debts. I think that's a pretty safe bet to say.
Okay. So I guess once again, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen. But do you foresee this having an impact on property prices in your main capital cities like your Sydney metro areas and your kind of Brisbane and Melbourne metro areas?
I think definitely in the short term, it will. Undoubtedly, when so many people have lost their jobs, and I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet, unfortunately. I think undoubtedly there is going to be some sort of effect on house prices. Is it going to be the same sort of effect we saw on the stock market or whatnot? No, because it's not as liquid. Property is not as liquid. So you can't just panic sell your properties, right? So it's not going to be anything like what we saw in the stock market, but I think undoubtedly there is going to be some sort of correction. But in saying that, it is going to be short-lived, because what the government does historically, every time where there is a downturn, they open up the doors, open up migration, they allow people to come back, they allow migration back into the country, which stimulates the economy. That's going to put upward pressure on house prices. There's already a shortage of stock of house prices in the capital cities. So when they open up the doors and allow migration into the country, that's just going to put more pressure on house prices. And I think what they're probably going to do as well is allow overseas investors back into the market, because the amount of money that overseas investors put back into the market is unbelievable. And with the Australian dollar being the lowest it's been in 10, 15 years.
A lot of buying power.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So I think in the short term there is going to be a correction, but if people are going to think that they're going to be waiting for 4 or 5 years to 4 or 5 years for it to go back up, I think it's going to be quite short-lived.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that, mate. I think this is purely, obviously the unemployment's obviously a big factor. There's a lot of uncertainty, but I think there's a lot of negative sentiment that would put downwards pressure on the market. But the reality is there's people out there that want to buy. And I think it's those people who've got the kind of the guts to be able to sit it out and buy good quality property and be able to see this through. So in terms of as a buyer, let's say that you're in a position where you've got job security. You've got certainty around your job to the best of your knowledge. You've got the right risk management strategy in terms of insurances and whatnot. So of course, if something did happen, you're going to be protected. And you've got cash in the bank and you want to invest. What would be your feedback to individuals? What would be your advice to them at the moment based on what's going on?
I think 100% like what you said. If you have got your cash buffers in place, and if you have a safe, secure job, and even after you put a deposit down on a property, you're still going to have cash buffers in place for say 3 or 6 months, then I think right now is the next 6 months are going to be the best time to purchase a property. And I think that's why we've had a lot more experienced investors come out of the woodworks. They weren't buying when everyone else was buying. Just in the past 2 or 3 weeks, we've had a lot of inquiries from people who are in that situation, ready to take advantage of some really good opportunities.
Yeah, it's kind of like as the old saying goes, you make hay while the sun shines. And I think this creates an opportunity. It is definitely those people who have the right buffers in place, right? Because this is not a time where you want to be putting every last red cent into your first property, right?
100%, that's right. Yeah, I think the number one thing is we've actually knocked clients back over the past 2 weeks because I asked them. I don't have to ask them. I just don't have the heart. I know how many people are going to be struggling. I've asked them. I said, look, how much of a buffer do you have after you purchase this property? And they're like, oh no, we're only going to have like 1 or 2 months worth of savings. I said, no, I can't help you. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you've got the right buffers, if you've got the cash flows in place, then definitely now's a good time. But you need to make sure you have them in place. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Yeah, because I guess worst case scenario, you lose your job, your tenant loses their job too. So then you're trying to keep everything afloat. And of course, it might take a couple of months to pivot and be able to get back in employment or do whatever you need to do. I guess particularly with the latest announcement in terms of the PM saying that there's no evictions to happen for the next 6 months.
Sure.
It doesn't put you in a great position if you don't have the cash flow to support yourself.
100%. That's right. I honestly think that announcement from the PM was the right announcement. I think as landlords, we also have a responsibility to show compassion and leniency to our tenants if we can. Unfortunately, a lot of landlords do over leverage themselves and they don't have the buffers in place, so they might not be able to. Yeah. But I think if we are in a position to, it's our responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I agree, mate. Look, at the end of the day, you're providing a home for somebody, and yes, you profit from that. But I think it's you're providing a service first. So I guess mate, when it comes to the negotiation process, and without giving away all of your secrets, with in this current time, with all of these unknowns, and it's definitely a buyer's market.
Yep.
Obviously, there's all of these extra risks that buyers do need to take on because there is unknowns moving forwards. So how do you bring that into the negotiation process to be able to negotiate a better deal?
So I think it really depends on a few things. One thing is you need to know how the agent likes to negotiate. So some agents will just use a strong offer. If you put in a strong offer, they're just going to use that against you for all the other buyers and take it right through to the last day. Whereas other agents, if you give a strong offer early, they'll advise their client to take it. So I think the first thing is understanding how each agent likes to negotiate. That's probably first and foremost. But also taking into consideration the current climate. So vendors are going to be just as stressed and nervous as buyers are going to be as well, if not more, because they've already put down a decent amount of money on the marketing and the mindset, or they might have already bought somewhere else. So the vendors are going to be more stressed normally than a buyer is, and you can use that in your favor. So we successfully negotiated on a property in Adelaide only on Friday, actually, and I just told the agent, look, the reality is we might be going into lockdown in the next week or two, and if I don't have a building and pest report done before then, your vendor is going to be sitting on their hands with this, and we can't buy something either. This is the best offer we can put in. Let's get the deal done. It was about 15% under market value.
Wow.
But I let them know as well. I said, look, if it doesn't sell this weekend, we're going to go into lockdown next week. So what does your vendor want to do? And it was true. Like, so we, successfully negotiated. We're doing a building and pest report tomorrow. Hopefully we don't go into lockdown overnight. And then we can see how we go.
And these are things that I think many buyers don't know. And this is why we sincerely advocate using a buyer's agent like yourself, because these are little tricks that you don't know. And particularly if you're emotional as well as a buyer, it's sometimes really difficult to have these objective and kind of no BS conversations, right? Because buying a property is an emotional process. Doesn't matter who you are.
100%, that's right. Another one was, we settled on a property a few weeks ago for first-time buyers on the Northern Beaches, and we were trying to purchase for them during the peak of the market, right? And I ended up going through about 40 open homes for them, and out of 40, we only put 2 forward because the other 38, we knew it was going to go up over the market, or the photos weren't accurate, or for whatever reason it wasn't right. The first one we put forward to them, we went in with a strong offer early, and then it ended up, it was about $800,000 property, and it ended up going for $920.
Wow.
The agent held our offer and used it against us to the very end of the campaign. Ended up going for $120,000 more, and my clients wanted to keep going, and I said no, we can't. It's my job to tell you that, although you're emotionally invested and you like the property, it's my job to tell you, we can't pay that much for it. We ended up settling for something for $820 in Colorado, which was bigger and in a better position than that first one. Beautiful. So now, even though there's been a downturn, they're not concerned because they haven't paid 5 or 10% over market value. We already bought under market value, so it's not a concern to them.
And here's the thing, I think many people are fearful when they buy a property because it is, for most, the most significant financial decision that you'll ever make in your life. And I think many of us fear the idea of losing money. Like, you buy this property and then the market falls by 10%. And you go, oh shit, I've just lost 80 grand or 100 grand. But we haven't really lost money, have we?
Unless you sell, no, you haven't. It's this mental thing that people have. It goes up, you think you got cash in your pocket, but you don't unless you go on leverage of it.
Exactly right. And I think this is what most people need to realize, that if you buy on good quality fundamentals, like for example, like what you said with that last property, you're buying in a good blue chip area in a prime location, a bigger property than your typical property in the marketplace, then that property's most likely always going to do well into the future, right? When the economic conditions are right.
100%, that's right. I mean, Sydney's Northern Beaches, you're limited with how much you can build. You've got the sea on one side, you've got national parks, you're limited with where you can build from. And it's I think it's the best city in the world, best area of the, best country in the world. So there's going to be demand there. It doesn't matter in the long term, it doesn't matter what the market's doing.
Yeah, and I agree 100%, mate. So there are some other people that are looking for speculative opportunities right now. Do you think in the current market, it's a good time to speculate?
I don't think in any market it's a good time to speculate, mate.
I'm glad we agree, Bobby. I knew I liked you for a reason. So there's a lot of these properties like NRAS or properties that are in regional areas. As the expert, why don't you like those types of options?
Well, let's even think about not regional, right? Let's even think about areas that are tourism driven. So I think like Cairns and Airlie Beach and all those areas, I think they're speculative still. However, not as speculative as a regional area. But look at what's going to happen to those markets now when no one's traveling. If you're buying in an area where the economy is just driven by one industry or two industries, it's a very, very risky purchase. So mining towns, tourism, all that sort of stuff is very, very risky. But if you're sticking to the capital cities and there's 3 or 4 industries driving that economy, if one industry is struggling, there's 3 or 4 other industries that are going to be driving that economy regardless.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that's why Sydney and Melbourne and more or less Brisbane have done so well, is because they've got those diverse ranges of employment. And if one particular sector takes a dive, then it's got the rest to prop it up, right?
100%. They're international cities, international companies are bringing their businesses to those cities and they're going to stay put for years to come.
I hear, mate. So from somebody watching this, what would be your advice to them moving forward? What would be maybe 3 actionable tips that you'd suggest to them if they're potentially looking to buy property over the next, say, 6 to 12 months?
So number 1 would be make sure you have your buffers in place, make sure you have your cash flows in place. Second would be starting with your end goal in mind. So it's another thing that we recommend all our clients to do, and we do that for them, is starting with the end goal in mind. Where do you want to be in 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years? And essentially based on your personal situation, you reverse engineer the system, you reverse engineer the strategy to reach that target. And from that, it would be educate yourself as well. There's no reason why people can't educate themselves in the current climate, especially while we're in lockdown at home, right? There's an unlimited amount of information online, podcasts, books. So definitely be those 3: educate yourself, start with the end goal in mind, and have your buffers and cash flows in place.
Beautiful, mate. Look, I think that's great advice. It's sound advice. Property has done so well for so long because it is such a solid asset class in our country if you're buying good quality blue chip property. And look, I think it pays to get the right advice. So guys, if you watch this video, you're interested in getting some insights from Bobby, even just having a chat and furthering the conversation around how he can potentially help you take advantage of the opportunities that exist. We'll include all of Bobby's details in the comments below. Bobby, thanks again for making the time, mate. I really appreciate it and look forward to catching up again soon.
Mate, thanks for having me.
Take care.